Archaic Records.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Archaic Records here with you again. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. And today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about the 1976 self-titled debut album by one of the most important bands in the history of its genre. Well, actually, one of the most important bands in the history of any genre, for that matter, the Ramones. Now, the Ramones formed in 1974 in Queens, New York. But it wasn't until April of 1976 that the band would release their self-titled debut record. Produced by Craig Leon, this record has not only stood up to the test of time, but it would seem as time goes on, this record is just held in higher and higher regard. Now, for whatever it's worth, or however much stock you put in anything like this, in 2020, Rolling Stone ranked this album at number 47 on its list of 500 greatest albums of all time. And in 2022, they ranked it at number 1 on its list of 100 greatest debut albums of all time. Now, for me, this really is one of the most important punk rock records of all time. To me, this really is punk rock 101. I think that this is an incredible introductory course to the genre. For somebody who's sort of new to the scene, sort of interested in getting in at the grassroots, if you will, I think that you would be well served to be steered in the direction of this record. I mean, this record has all of the sound, style, and attitude, everything that comes out of the punk rock genre. I mean, this is punk rock really at its best, but at the same time, this record is user-friendly. It's accessible. The Ramones have never hidden from their pop influence. They've never ran away from their pop sensibility. And I've always contested that the Ramones were at least as much Dion and the Belmonts as they were the Sex Pistols. So I think if you're looking for a fun, accessible, classic introduction to the genre, I think that this record is an incredible place to start. Now, for me, in my personal sort of musical journey into my early days of being into this type of music, I remember the first record that really was my introduction and sort of my first lesson into the classic genre of punk rock was the 1978 self-titled album by Generation X, which I think was an absolutely outstanding introduction as well. You really can't go wrong with either of these records. If I had to choose one over the other, I would say that the first Ramones record is slightly better. But man, I do love that Generation X record too. For me personally, I would say that my first sort of personal first-hand knowledge of the Ramones came when I was probably in middle school. Now, I don't really remember a time in my life when I didn't know who the Ramones were. I mean, it's just a name that you heard, even if you didn't really know what it meant. I just always remember hearing the name of the band and sort of hearing the term punk rock before I even really knew what that was either. But I would say that my first sort of first-hand knowledge of the band, or at least being able to put a face and a sound to the name, was when I was in middle school one night. I think I was up late watching movies on cable when I stumbled upon the classic film Rock and Roll High School, which to me is still one of my favorite movies ever. This is easily still one of my top 5 favorite comedy movies of all time. I watch this movie still probably 3 or 4 times a year, but it was the first time I remember seeing the band and actually putting a face and a sound to the name. And I remember at the time, like I said, I was probably in middle school, maybe late grammar school when I first saw this movie. And I remember that the band, to me, I thought they were a little bit scary, but I thought that their sound was actually really cool. I thought their songs were really catchy. And of course, what a young, red-blooded male would not have sort of developed at least a little bit of a crush on Riff Randall. Of course, the Ramones' #1 fan. I I remember I was at a convention of some sort several years ago, and I happened to see PJ Souls was there. And I didn't go up and, have her sign anything or go up and talk to her. I'm not really an autograph hound. But as I walked by her table, I did kind of do the side eye, and I was like, man, that's her. I can't believe that's really her. Of course, if you grew up in the 80s, PJ Souls was in a bunch of really kind of iconic movies for our generation. Of course, she was in Halloween. She was in Stripes, famously. And of course, she was in Private Benjamin. But I think to me, and I think to a lot of young music fans growing up around that time, she will always be Riff Randall. And on the very off chance that you have not seen this movie, you really have to go out and see this one, or at least go revisit it, even if you have seen it, because this thing never gets old. I absolutely love this movie. Like I said, this is probably in my top 5 favorite comedies of all time. I might go watch this tonight. I'm not even lying about that. As far as my fandom into the Ramones, I think that began probably several years later. It was either right towards the very end of high school, or it was sort of that first summer out of high school. I do remember the first CD I ever bought of the Ramones as I was first sort of starting to get into this kind of music. Like I said, the first classic punk rock band I ever really got into was Generation X. And as soon as I just became completely ensconced in Generation X, I wanted pretty much to discover everything. And of course, the Ramones had that sort of name brand that you knew, even if you were at the time sort of a poser, which I probably was. But I went out, and I do remember at one point in time, I bought the CD Ramones Mania. I took it home, and I was just completely hooked by that compilation record. That thing has got the goods, pretty much, that go all the way through their career. I still think that's actually one of the best of albums that you can find by any band. And not long after that, I went out and I started just buying everything I could find. At first, I will not lie to you, at first I was sort of intimidated to go out and buy Ramones CDs at this time, during this time at least. In the early 1990s. I don't think this is really a thing now with the internet and all this, but at the time, some people about my age, or at least me, I can only speak for myself, I guess, but you sort of lived in mortal fear of being considered a poser, and I certainly was at some point in time, but I do remember being very intimidated going into my local record stores in my hometown and buying Ramones CDs, because at the time I didn't know really anything about them, and I was always so terrified that the record clerk was going to quiz me on them as I was sort of growing my fandom of all of this type of music, really. It's sort of funny, I do miss those days sometimes of going into the record store and sort of being intimidated and scared of the snotty, elitist sort of record clerks. It's interesting now being a record collector and being into the physically formatted type of music. We're such a niche community, and it's usually such kind of a tight-knit thing that when you go into your local record stores, and I do this all the time, I'm always going in and out of record stores around here in Nashville, you sort of get to know the people that work there. It's a very friendly thing, which I love. I do love when, sparking up friendly conversations and talking about records you're buying, but part of me, just a little part of me, gets nostalgic sometimes for those really snotty record store clerks that kind of judge you and sort of quiz you and try to make you feel as small as you possibly can. But I do remember going out and buying pretty much as many of the albums on CD as I could at the time. And fortunately for me, sort of, they were relatively easy to find. And back in those days, of course, used CDs were plentiful. And I'm sure I stocked up my collection mostly with used CDs. But it was the Ramones Mania, what was actually really the first CD of theirs I ever got. And it just blew me away. And going back and collecting all of the albums over time was something that I just took a lot of pleasure out of. And this is still a band to this day that I listen to pretty much on the regular. I mean, they're always playing in my car. They're always playing at home. Now, for me, also, I was very fortunate in, I believe it was 1996, I got to see the band live one time towards the very end of their run. And it was an absolutely incredible experience. Again, this is right around the time, well, by this point in time, I had been a fan for maybe a couple years. I think I had most of the albums, at least by that point, at least on CD. And I got a chance to go see the band one time right towards the very end before they retired. And like I said, to me, that is a memory now that I hold very high regard. I wish I could tell you at the time that it was the greatest show of all time. Sadly, it wasn't. The Ramones, the day I saw them, were actually not very good at all. They played just incredibly fast. You could basically not understand anything that they were playing or saying. And you really had to put your ear out to kind of like gather the information of the songs that were coming at you. Of course, later I found out that Joey and Johnny were basically not even on speaking terms. They were basically just kind of writing out a contract. And of course, Dee Dee was long gone by then. But at the time, I was I think I was 20, 21 years old. I didn't care. I was just such a big fan. And I knew, and I was absolutely incredibly just like blown away that I was standing there reasonably close, relatively close. And like I said, Dee Dee was long gone by this point, but Marky was back in the band by this point in time. Of course, he came back about 1987 or 1988, I believe. And I could not believe that I was standing there looking at Joey and Johnny Ramone. And of course, Marky also, to maybe a little bit of a lesser degree. But it didn't matter to me that they weren't very good. Even at the time, I knew they weren't very good. And I was very sort of easily impressed back then. But nowadays, as I've gotten older, and of course, that was the very end of one of the most iconic, if not the single most iconic punk rock band of all time. Just to say that I had the opportunity to see them in person, like I said, it was not the greatest show I've ever seen, but it is probably one of my favorite all-time show memories, just because I was literally looking and I could see the whites in the eyes of Joey and Johnny Ramone. And as a young kid who was just first really starting to kind of get into this kind of music, I mean, that was just kind of like a life-altering thing. And I really, really look back on that concert very fondly. Anyway, I really love this record a lot. Like I said, I think that this is one of the most important records in the history of punk rock. Now, I don't know that this is necessarily one of the greatest records of all time. I don't think that this is even their best record of all time. But I absolutely love this record. I come back to it time and time again. And for me, this was a record. The first time I remember listening to this one specifically, I mean, this thing was life-altering. I did not leave this record the same way I came into it. And if nothing else, this record just confirmed to me that I was heading the right direction in my musical life. And really, this record and this band, to me, just kind of affirmed that, yeah, it's okay to be kind of an outcast. It's okay to be kind of a throwaway kid. There is a community of people out there that you can belong to. And really, this was one of those records, the first time I heard it. And even now, still, like I said, I don't think that this is my favorite record by the Ramones. But for some reason, this one has always been sort of like the most important one to me. I actually do believe that apart from Ramones Mania, the compilation, I do believe that this was actually the first actual album I bought of theirs. This is like a sentimental favorite forever for me. But I really love this record. Like I said, this came out on April 23rd, 1976. It is produced by Craig Leon. And of course, it's got the iconic album cover. I think that this is one of the best album covers ever. I mean, just look at those guys. Those guys, honestly, I mean, this was 1976. in New York City. I mean, these guys look like a street gang. I mean, these guys look like guys you do not want to mess with in a dark alley. And I mean, this record came out before I was even born. So I can't even imagine how sort of off-putting and scary this might have been to the general public when they first saw this record. But I mean, these are four pretty like badass looking dudes right here. Of course, famously, I mean, this is one of the most iconic, I think, record covers in the history of rock and roll. It's been, imitated so many times, and ironically, as most people know, the record company only paid $125 for this picture. And I mean, honestly, this record was recorded for only about $6,000. So, but the fact that they only paid $125 for this picture from Punk magazine is absolutely incredible, because this is one of the most iconic photographs or album covers, at least during the punk movement, and I think of all time. I mean, that is just striking. Like I said, I mean, these guys, they look like dudes serving time, honestly. Anyway, the record starts with probably one of the most iconic songs in the history of the Ramones catalog. Probably their most well-known song, Blitzkrieg Bop. This is a song I never get tired of. I realize it's not a very deep cut, but I do think that this song is like punk rock perfection. I said this about Sonic Reducer by the Dead Boys. I'll say this about Blitzkrieg Bop. If you're going to make a compilation record with 20 songs on it, to have anthropologists study 500 years from now to say this was punk rock, this was what this was all about, I mean, the song Blitzkrieg Bop has to be on it. I think it's probably one of the 5 or 6, maybe top 10 most iconic songs ever to come out of this genre. It is absolutely a classic. I mean, it's basically 2 minutes of pure perfection. Absolutely love that song. I never get tired of it. I think the first time I remember hearing that song, and I didn't know who it was at the time, but the first time I remember hearing that song was in the movie Vacation. As the Griswolds are leaving Chicago on as they go up the on-ramp onto the interstate, that song plays in the movie. And I remember even as a kid, the first time I heard that song in that movie, I was like, what's that? That's cool. Anyway, the second song is Beat on the Brat. That is another just absolutely iconic Ramones tune. Again, another song I never get tired of. I mean, this record has got the goods. Like I said, I don't think that this is my favorite Ramones record. The more I cover the Ramones on this channel, which I will, because you can't not, I think I'll get to the record, which is actually my favorite. This one would be close, though. But I just think by maybe a little bit it's not my favorite. But Beat on the Brat is a classic. Again, just one of their most iconic, well-known songs. The third song is Judy is a Punk, which is probably my favorite song on this record. One of my all-time favorite Ramones songs ever. My all-time favorite Ramones song is Bonzo Goes to Bitburg, but I absolutely love Judy is a Punk. I think that is probably my favorite song off this record. There's a lot of good stuff on here, but I think Judy is a Punk is probably my favorite track off this album. It's good. The next song is I Want to Be Your Boyfriend. That is another song that I absolutely love. I do remember the scene in Rock and Roll High School. What I remember most about the song is its scene in Rock and Roll High School. That is a really great song. A little bit slower, obviously. An iconic Ramones song. I absolutely love that song. It's a classic. Chainsaw is next. Again, just another Ramones classic. Maybe... No, I won't say that. I was going to say maybe one of my lesser songs on the record. But I really like the song Chainsaw also. Now I Want to Stiff Some Glue is after that, and that is the goods. I absolutely love the song Now I Want to Sniff Some Glue. That, again, is just a punk rock, sort of pop punk Ramones classic. Man, I absolutely love that song. Side 1 ends with the song I Don't Want to Go Down to the Basement. I mean, what can you say? That song is just perfection. One of my favorite songs on the record. Behind Judy is a Punk, that might actually be my second favorite song on this record. Man, I love I Don't Want to Go Down to the Basement. Side 2 begins with the song Loudmouth. This song is okay. I mean, this might actually be one of the lesser songs on the record for me. Not that I dislike it, because I absolutely don't dislike it. I really don't genuinely dislike anything off this record. Like I said, there may be a record by the Ramones that I like better, that I'll get to at some point. Loudmouth is probably one of my lesser songs on the record, but I do really like it. Like I said, there's really nothing not to like on this record. Havana Affair is next. I really like this song. Again, I just love the tempo of the Ramones. I love the simple approach, but I love the pop sensibility. Like I said, I mean, this band was just as influenced by the Ronettes, to me, as they were by the Stooges or the Clash or Velvet Underground. And I just absolutely love the fact that they brought a lot of pop sensibility into their music. I've actually heard a lot of people say that the Ramones actually were not a punk rock band, that they were a pop band. And honestly, sometimes I don't even really disagree with that. Listen to My Heart comes next after that. This is kind of a filler song. I don't dislike it. I don't necessarily think it is a high point on the record, but I really do like it. Again, there's really not much that I dislike on this record. 53rd and 3rd is next, and man, that's kind of a dark tune for those of you who know the story behind that one. I think this is one of the best songs on the record. It's dark, it's nasty. It definitely paints a picture of New York City in the 1970s. One of my favorite genres, sort of in any type of movie, or one of my favorite film genres, are just movies that were filmed in New York City kind of in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Movies kind of like Urban Cowboy or Warriors or anything like that, where they really show the nasty, dirty, gritty side, the pre-gentrification New York City, pre-Giuliani New York City. And 53rd and 3rd is a song that you can just kind of like see it and smell it and taste it, the nastiness of 70s New York City. I love that song. It's a dark one, but I absolutely love that song. The next song is their cover of Let's Dance, and here we go with the Pop Ramones. I absolutely love this song. This is one of the better songs on the record, and again, I love the pop sensibility of the Ramones. And really, what's interesting to me is I think that Joey Ramone, I think some of his vocal highlights throughout his career, especially with the band, is the stuff that was more poppy, stuff like this song. I think this is one of his best vocal performances on the record. I almost feel like you could tell that he was more excited about doing songs like this. Do You Want to Dance? Songs like that. It just seemed like he was more excited. He had like more enthusiasm in his voice. And I think some of his greatest vocal performances came on the stuff that was sometimes the most cotton candy, if you will. The next song is I Don't Want to Walk Around With You. Oh my God. That is the goods. That is one of my all-time favorite songs on this record. That is just absolutely perfection. I love the chorus. I love Joey's voice on this song. I mean, that is an all-time classic. And the last song on the record is Today Your Love, Tomorrow the World. A decent song to close out the record. I don't think it's necessarily a super high point on the record. But it is very good. Like I said, it's not a filler. I wouldn't go that far. But I mean, this album is 14 songs and 29 minutes. I mean, there's not much filler on this thing. So I would say that Love, Today Your Love, Tomorrow the World is a very good song. Maybe not one of the best on the record, but I will say that I do enjoy that song a lot. But I would say that, going back and looking, I would say that Judy is a Punk is probably my favorite song off this record. Now I Want to Sniff Some Glue, I Don't Want to Go Down to the Basement, 53rd and 3rd, those are probably the top for me. But man, you really can't go wrong with this record. And again, this is probably, I think, one of the most quintessential albums in the genre. I think if somebody were to come to me and ask me for advice and say, hey man, I'm thinking about becoming a punk rocker, I think you would be doing them a tremendous service if you steered them in this direction. Because to me, this record is it's just life-altering. Like I said, for me, you don't leave this record the same way you came into this record. I mean, if this doesn't change your life and turn you into a drooling, babbling super fan, then you may be a lost cause. I don't know what else to tell you. Anyway, man, thanks for checking out this video. A little bit look back on the 1976 self-titled debut album by one of the most, if not the single most iconic band in the history of the genre, the Ramones. Now, I'm not suggesting that they are necessarily the best band in the history of the genre. There is a band that I do think is, and I will do a video on them at some point very soon. But if you could find a band, I think, that is more iconic or more symbolic of the genre of punk rock, I think that would be a tall task. Anyway, man, thank you so much for checking out this video. This is Archaic Records in Nashville, Tennessee. My name is Jamie. Be sure to go out and support your local record store. Listen to the Ramones. Feel free to leave a comment down below. And remember to check back every week for Morrissey Monday, my weekly celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths. And again, thank you so much for checking out this video. I really do appreciate it. And I will talk to you next time.